So how did I become able to do this stuff? I mean, part of how I became able to do this stuff was to get out of doing other people's research and to design my own research. But you know what? Having that experience actually of having to have been required to conduct these kind of parachuting researches in little bit parts, and I've done analysis on other people's projects, I've done interviews on other people's projects. So, you know, I did have all of that in my background. I guess I try and do this with a lot of things that I do now, is that there's a platform built into it. So that there's a sharing, so there's maybe 4 points, depends on what it is. But if you're engaging with organizations and gatekeepers, they usually want the knowledge straight away. You're also interviewing them, and they're part of creating change or delivering a service, or maybe they're developing out their own policies. Increasingly, I try to design research that funds and incorporates and is realistic about time, saying to practitioners, for example, you're going to come for half a day every 3 months, and we're going to build together the research tools, we're going to build together the knowledge, we're going to share the knowledge. And so that even if you get to the end of that research project and you sat around twiddling your thumbs, well, I mean, people just get on with their lives, completely forget about it. Then 12 months later, you come along going, oh, I've published this article, or I've written this research report. Then you've already hopefully benefited from some kind of knowledge sharing.
How we look at this knowledge transaction process or facilitation process was to say that our knowledge on expertise on a particular aspect which you engage with is going to be zero, whereas you want to learn more from the rest of the people. So, you know, as a facilitation, as research itself is about facilitation, where we try to bring it. But some of the interesting thing which I feel is with intergenerational sex work, you know, communities with which when I was engaging with, and the idea was to find out about how they look at sex work, right? Is it a sex work is it a work, or is it something which is not work? And within the sex work, is it a matter of choice, or is it a matter of being forced into it, or is it about you are being forced into sex work, but after that you start exercising a choice to be in sex work? So you have these different ways to look at it. But one thing which I felt was where I started reimagining some of the knowledge, some of these debates, was to and forced me to go beyond it, is probably one of the scenarios where I found that that some of the girls with whom I was engaging with, for them it was like, as a researcher, many of us come with a binary. Either you are in sex work or you are not in sex work, right? So if you have been taken away from sex work, means you are not in sex work. So, but here is a situation where we met somebody, that particular girl has moved away from sex work, and she's largely got into some kind of a profession, and she's engaging in that work. But then when I was asking, talking to her, and then she said that when I go for a vacation, summer vacation, when I go back home, I do sex work. So then all your indicators that whether you are no longer in sex work, because the sex work is a moral binary, right? It's like either you are in sex work or not in sex work. But this kind of people who get into sex work and then leave, for them sex work is immaterial. It is not so important for them to even look at sex work as something which is defining them as a thing. So while this kind of analysis has happened for other things, but for something which is morally right or wrong issue, it's very difficult for us to put it in that kind of a thing. So I thought those were some of the areas where certain findings make you think that some of the knowledge which you had has to be completely reversed. So your indicators have to change. All the research frame questions might have to change. All the questions were devised in such a way that it is about one part of it, but then this knowledge actually makes your entire thing irrelevant. Earlier I was looking at myself from the location of what are the privileges that I don't have, or what are the things where I feel discriminated, what are the things where have a lived experience of deprivation or discrimination. But then it also had another aspect of what are the privileges you have. So your locations is about the privileges that you enjoy. Privileges not only you enjoy, but privileges that that the social identity of yours enjoy. So you may not be enjoying directly, but anybody who is similar to you do enjoy. So in a way, it's about, while in such an individualistic world where we are constantly look at everything from an individual self, whether it is about deprivation or privilege, there is an element of privilege which comes from your social identity, national identity, and many other identities, right? So that is something which some of them have been captured through feminism, some isms, but some of them are not, because they are largely intersectional. And more than intersectional also is often looked at it as a linear addition of it. Like if you are a female plus a black, it is a female plus black. But often it is not as linear addition of deprivations. So intersectionality sometimes is this mainstreamisms give, for example, will give women a privilege, right, within the patriarchy. So how to understand those things are something which is important here to analyze that. So in my location, I feel this constantly a lot of things is about my engagement with an underprivileged whom I am studying. So that power thing matters. And for me, the best example of a researcher who I keep in mind is Buddha. I would call him the first researcher, because if you look at the history of his life history, he gave up his position of privilege and he went and studied, and he became part of the cause which he is studying, and he just subsumed himself into that thing, and then he came out with a recommendation or findings or what thing and all. So in a way, his life is a history, and it's a kind of a thing for many of us like privileged who want to study underprivileged. I think that's the example which I always keep in mind, that you have to become part of the problem, you have to become part of the cause which you are studying for you to understand that lived experience.
I do think that we are starting to really take seriously changing the outputs. And I think that's something that has changed. Critical ethnography, I think, no matter, positionality, all of those debates, the subaltern, the other post-colonial approaches that haven't been taken on board as much as they should have been, in my view, have all questioned a lot about the author, and the subject, like author or researcher researched, inside or outside, and all these kinds of things, but very much less critique and advice and change has been done in the area of what we do with all of this stuff. It is still the case. Obviously, we're universities. Our main job is to write arcane articles. No matter how much money gets spent on knowledge exchange and impact, that's still what we have to do to be able to get our job and keep our job and progress in our job, right? But I feel that in this project, for example, that I'm doing now, that, I mean, yeah, of course I'm under pressure to write an article about it, and you know what, I probably should, but I do feel like things have shifted a bit in that it's valid, more valid than it used to be, and okay. The output of a research project is some videos and guide, stuff that people might actually use. We still have this idea that you do research, you start research, you plan research, you do research, you finish research, you come up with the genius plan, and then you share it with the world. I think knowledge equity, there needs to be more involvement of people throughout the course. Yeah. And I think having sharing and things like that within a project built in, and these are the sorts of projects that I mean, I've put a lot of energy and effort and time into trying to design projects like that in recent years and not been funded. For me, the area that I work in now, it's a requirement. This is the sort of thing that I'm working on, is like what I would call a platform that is built as part of a research project, so that it's just so distant and far off in time. Even if it's a 1-year project, you come to the end and you do like a sharing of research findings, and research findings isn't even necessarily, like, the way that we do it as academics isn't even necessarily the most useful thing.